Hello and welcome to Dialogue of Civilisations. The world we share appears to be in the greatest state of flux since the end of the Second World War, driven by real or imagined rivalries. Never before has humanity been so polarized despite its enhanced interconnectedness. In the field of human conflict, the perpetuation of one's way of living as the highest form of civilization or just as a value system entitled to preservation has never lost its place in advancing one's interests. Despite all their differences, all claimants of civilization hierarchy seem to share one commonality, and they are bound by the self-same. That is the sense of exclusivity, the entitlement to retain one's socio-cultural political sphere of influence and export these to other realms. In some ways, expansionism remains at the heart of all divisions and conflicts in the world. Yet since no claimant has ever attained timeless, overarching omnipotence, dialogue always has and will remain the great leveler. Clash is by all means inevitable, but so is dialogue. From the seemingly never-ending tensions in the Middle East to the present troubles in Eastern Europe to proxy wars in different regions of the globe, we will look at different schools of thought and geopolitical doctrines and understand the root causes of divisions, conflicts, and universal oneness, and its limitations as they appear through the prism of current affairs. In the wider landscape of Eurasia, with the confrontation between the West and East assuming an even more palpable shape, it has become a challenging task for nations on or near the continental fault line to make portentous decisions. Armenia, a former Soviet republic in the South Caucasus, has found itself in a very intriguing position since the war in Ukraine began. The paradox of its situation is that, despite all of its attempts to publicly distance itself from its long-standing historical ally, expressing a desire to join the European Union, Armenia's economic relations with Russia has continued to flourish since February 2022. The trade turnover between these two nations has reached a massive $7.4 billion mark by year-end 2023, with the estimates suggesting that this figure could almost be doubled up to a gigantic $16 billion level by the end of this year. The actual gist of the paradox is not perhaps so much about the expanding character of the economic ties per se, but their nature once viewed from the prism of Western sanctions against Russia. Armenia's role concerning the re-exportation of Russian commodities and the facilitation of trade between sanctioned Russian entities and their Western customers provides an interesting field for examination. The impression is that Armenia is acting for its own economic agenda as a major artery to assist Russia in its war efforts in Ukraine. Is Armenia entitled to straddle the divide and enjoy the best of two worlds? At a time when the West is hell-bent on weakening the Russian economy, is it moral for Armenia, which has EU aspirations, to be of service to Russia in such a self-serving way? I will discuss this issue with Brussels-based Gary Cartwright, publishing editor of EU Today. Mr. Cartwright, allow me to start our conversation with a very general question. What is your reflection on Armenia's current geopolitical dilemma, so to speak?
That's a very tough question. Well, if the plan is to, get closer to Russia, then he's not going to make life any easier for himself there in the long term. That's a fact. I would have thought that it would be in the best interests of Armenia, as in any country, to get out of the Russian sphere as far as possible. Putin still holds, I think, to the old Soviet doctrine of what we have, we hold. He's not going to let one of his client states go as easily as that. No way. He is choreographing everything that Armenia does. Nobody should make any mistake about that. If he's got a clear idea of the trajectory he wants, where he wants to take Armenia, he will have to do whatever it takes. Armenia is not powerful enough. It's not big enough. It's not rich enough to call the shots. And so to a degree, he's going to have to go with the flow. There are so many countries that are helping Russia out at the moment that even if Putin were to lose one of his friends, one of his suppliers, I don't think it would be a devastating blow to him because he's got his apples in so many baskets, as we would say.
I'm terribly sorry. Allow me to ask this one. What is particularly notable about Armenia's position?
Well, what was it, Stalin again, who coined the phrase useful idiot?
Yeah.
A lot of countries in Central Asia are being scrutinized over the possibility of reselling Russian products. But Armenia is unique. It's the only one that aspires to be an EU member. That makes it special. Yes, maybe this is why Putin has let Armenia go, publicly at least, why the frozen conflict has ended, to put Armenia in a stronger position for EU membership. This is a very, very long process, and I can only speak really about my own sort of contacts on more of the conservative side, and therefore the more business side, political groups in the European Parliament. They are more friendly towards Azerbaijan than Armenia, and have been really throughout the conflict. They're also very business savvy, and they tend to be nothing like the British were, but they tend to be slightly Eurosceptic. And so the EPP and the ECR group, the EPP, the largest one in the Parliament for many legislatures now, I don't think that they would actually be that friendly towards the idea of Armenia coming into the EU. And also those governments that have right of centre, sorry, those countries, those member states that have right of centre governments, I don't think that they would be very friendly towards Armenia coming in either. There has often been concerns about expansion being too much too soon. Nobody's coming into the EU now until all of those conditions have been fulfilled. I find it very difficult to imagine how Armenia will fulfill all of those conditions. Obviously, one of the most important things was the resolution of a conflict. Under the rules, a nation cannot enter the European Union if it has any unresolved border issues. So it's quite possible that resolving this particular conflict was the first step in Armenia's rehabilitation and its official move towards Europe. Honestly, can't see it. I can't even in the long-term future, possibly when I'm not even here anymore. I cannot see Armenia getting into the EU.
Are you actually suggesting there is such a concept as right and wrong decisions under the circumstances?
I think in a situation like this, where we are talking about Putin's Russia, you're either for them or against them. I don't think you can have a foot in each camp there. You can't have one foot in the free world and the other foot in Putin's Russia. It's terrible to admit this, because we had such hopes for, post-Soviet relations, and particularly, many trips to Russia as soon as we were able to. There was a great deal of optimism. People
back in the 90s, yes, of course.
Yeah, it was a very exciting time. And I think about Moscow and other parts of Russia in those days, and I think about what's going on there now, and it's like two different worlds.
Part of the massive turnover hike between Russia and Armenia is attributable to the documented re-exploitation of Russian gemstones and gold bullion. In 2023, Armenia was reported to have exported an estimated 4.5 million carats of diamonds, equating to 30 times more than this nation's own internal production. What can we conclude from this?
For those concerned, for those who are benefiting, morality is not an issue for them. It's the money that they're making. And they will also see this as getting a kind of a security blanket there, that they're ingratiating themselves towards Russia. I would argue that a lot of this wouldn't be happening if the West was still on the ball. The West lost the plot some time ago. Under Reagan and Thatcher's leadership, probably the last two real leaders that the West had, none of this would be happening. None of these questions would be asked. Nobody would dare to do this. Nobody would dare to act in the way that Armenia and other countries are acting in facilitating Russia's acquisition of sanctioned goods, for example. Reagan and Thatcher would have stomped on this immediately. They know what they can get away with. And they're getting away with it, aren't they? We have a large Armenian community in Belgium, and you'll be aware that here, where I'm sitting now, just up the road, we have one of the biggest diamond districts in the world, and we have a big problem with blood diamonds. And there is a big trade of blood diamonds, and this is Armenian controlled. This is a matter of fact, and others, drugs as well. So there's a lot of money in that community, a lot of money in that community. And I'm sure that you will have seen on the news problems with corruption in the institutions. There have been MEPs taking money from various organizations, various governments. The Eva Cayley example, of course, being the most prominent recently, but there have been many, many of these.
Well, this was a very thought-provoking and in many ways rather interesting conversation with Mr. Cartwright, who has sat at the center of the EU for so many decades. He is clearly a man of strong opinions. There seems to be no place for middle ground in his articulations. Perhaps one should allow for possibility that modern Armenia is stuck between rock and hard place, akin to a fish floundering on the riverside, making daily decisions to survive. Perhaps one should not be too harsh on Armenia. Civilization, after all, is a purely subjective notion and can change over time. And there are myriad concepts of civilization, and it's a task for humanity to undertake dialogue to enhance comprehension, compassion, and understanding. Looking forward to another edition of Dialogue of Civilization from AnewZ.